Okay, welcome everyone to the July 17th OMR Architecture Meeting. Just so everyone knows, this meeting is being recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube. So just keep that in mind if you have issues with that. So today we have one topic to discuss. This is from Erwin, who's been working on the OMR compiler source formatting. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to him to take us through that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try presenting the presentation through PowerPoint and see if it works. It's not available. Nice. All right, I'm going to have to manually share it. All right, can you see the
Yes.
PowerPoint presentations? I'm going to go full screen and see if that works.
Yeah.
Does it show like presenter view, or does it just show the full?
It's the presentation mode, so it's good.
Okay, the full screen?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, for me it's showing like notes and stuff. It doesn't matter. Okay, all right. So yeah, I'm just gonna go through the compiler component code formatting work and sort of what the plan is going forward. So the agenda is I'm just going to go through some background motivation quickly. I mean, we've already talked about this in the past, but just as a refresher, and then we'll get into the main part, which is the rollout plan on how we're going to implement this. I'll talk about the technical details about what is involved in all of this work, and then I'll go over some next steps for developers and sort of how this impacts all of us going forward. So first, yeah, the background motivation. The background is that the OMR project does not have a unified coding style because of just the history of the project and the code base. So there was a proposal to unify it, but it was ultimately rejected. And so a new proposal was made last year by myself, where we suggested we'll only do the compiler component. The reason for that is that the OMR compiler code style is not based on a common or well-known style, but it's also difficult to verify automatically. And so we decided to take some of the work from the original proposal and use clang-format and apply it to the compiler component. And that proposal was approved and now is being close to being implemented. So the motivation really is to define a consistent and testable coding style and remove the overhead of having committers give code format related comments. Like some of the, instead of having to, sort of have nitpicks on where the parentheses should go, so a lot of this should just be automatically done. And also it would help if the style was, familiar to newcomers, which is the style that essentially was agreed upon by the people who looked at the demo source code and everything when it was proposed first. So the rollout plan. So essentially what we're going to do is inform developers, which is what's happening in this forum, and possibly also maybe a mailing list, email, and wherever else we feel is appropriate. I suppose downstream projects as well. I'm going to open a pull request. It's already open. Links are at the end of this presentation, so I'll make the presentation available and you can find the links. There'll have to be a code freeze to prevent other changes getting in, just while we put the code formatting changes in. The PR that has the infrastructure changes, which I'll explain some of the infrastructure changes later on in the presentation. But either that PR will be updated with the actual code formatting changes, or we'll just open a new PR, whatever reviewers think is best. We'll activate the linter. Adam created a linter job in OMR, and so we'll have to activate that. We'll have to merge the PRs, and then we can finally unfreeze the code. So that's sort of the high-level plan, and I'll go over details on the technical aspects of things, as well as how we can manage the changes going forward.
What is the? Can I ask a question? What is the amount of time that you're expecting between code freeze and unfreeze? Is this hours or a day?
Um, hours, maybe just to sort of stabilize everything. It also depends on how thorough we want to be. So I have tested the changes in the past, both internally and on OpenJ9 tests, and there's not been any functional issues. But I imagine we might. That was done, when I applied the same sort of process going forward to the code base as it stood when I last tested it, which was a few months ago. Even if I was to test it, say today, the point from today to when we actually merge it, there will be some changes in, and so it depends on how careful we want to be. So if we want to sort of apply the changes and then run a whole suite of tests, it might make sense to be a day or two of code freeze.
Okay.
But from a just trying to get this in point of view, it could be hours. It's not very complicated to get this through.
Okay.
So I figure we can talk about that in the discussion later on, and we can finalize sort of some of the details on how we want to actually apply this. But like there will need to be a code freeze to prevent linter issues afterwards and merge conflicts on my part. Because once I format the code base, there will be merge conflicts if anyone else has made changes since then. Okay, was that it?
For me, yes.
Okay, all right. The ETA, we want to move ahead with this sooner rather than later. We're planning to get this completed for OMR 0.7.0 release, September 30th. We're not going to wait that long. Ideally, it would be done probably late July, early August. We're just trying to make sure there's just a couple of vacations we need to take into account. So we want to do that when everyone is available and there in case of any issues that we haven't foreseen. So what does this really all mean? There will be a single PR that contains all the code formatting changes. It'll contain two sets of changes, really. One is namespace merging, which I'll talk about later, and the other is the actual code formatting changes, which will apply to every C, CPP, HHPP file in the compiler directory in OMR. And then once merged, developers are expected to maintain the formatting going forward in every commit. And then the linter will be used to gate changes that do not conform to the standard. It'll be very similar to the line endings check that you see on OMR right now. So we'll go through the technical details before I talk about how this applies or how this affects all of us going forward. So there's four main things that I'm going to talk about. One is clang-format itself, then the linter that Adam put in place, the Docker file that we've written, and then the actual namespace merging and code formatting stuff that has to go in. So as you know, clang-format is a formatting tool based on Clang. It uses a YAML file where you can specify the formatting options. This formatter, this config file will live in OMR and it'll live under the compiler directory. One interesting / annoying thing about clang-format is that newer versions are not a strict superset. And so different versions will interpret the same specification file differently. And by that, I don't mean, version 17 and version 18 interpret them differently. I mean, 18.1.4 and 18.1.8 will have differences in how it generates the formatting. And so we really do need it to be the exact same version that everyone uses. Otherwise, there will be a discrepancy between you and the linter. The project's going to use 18.1.8, and that's only just because that was the most stable release when this effort started. The current latest is 20.1.0, but I haven't tested it for aesthetics or functionality. I'm disinclined to use the latest right now because that will require sort of further vetting. Not to mention every release adds more configuration options, and it's okay not to specify it, but I don't know what the default will entail in terms of aesthetics. And so it is, in my opinion, better that we stick to the the version that people have seen embedded. And it is my expectation that if we were to upgrade later on, the diff between code formatting changes at that point will be far less than it is right now, where it's going to be a massive change. So, I mean, unless people have a strong reason for using 20, the current latest, I think we stick to what's simple and pragmatic for now. The linter that will be used in to sort of check the formatter of the code formatting changes is implemented as a Jenkins job. Adam created it. There's a link there. It is loosely based on the line endings job in terms of how it reports errors and also how it goes through the files and looks at the changes that are there for a particular PR. The way we implemented it is that we defined a Docker file, and the job will build the container image every single time. It does so because it'll be cached on the machine, and so every single time you build, it won't always have to do the full work. It oftentimes will be able to just use the cached container image file. The reason we did this is because of one, we wanted to minimize the maintenance overhead of having to maintain our own container image. There's no official clang-format image available online. There are some people who put up images, but the problem is we would have to then hope that they maintain it, but also the images that we can find online don't say if it's 18.1.8, it'll just say 18. And so the same version mismatch problems can happen over time. And we want to be guaranteed that the linter is not going to change unless we decide to upgrade the version. And so after sort of discussing with Adam and others, this is the best sort of compromise we came up. The way it works is that it runs the formatter on all files that are part of the PR, and then it does a diff. The idea being that if the file is formatted, clang format will have nothing to do, and the diff will be a no-op. So if the diff is not a no-op, then there's a formatting issue, and you have to go address it. And yeah, this only applies to files under the compiler directory because we're only formatting files under the compiler directory. So the Docker file is going to live in the OMR repository, and the idea for that is that it is a way for everyone to use a consistent format. You don't have to use a Docker file, but it is the recommended way because you are guaranteed not to have mismatch issues with the linter. You will be using the exact same tool that the linter is using to verify that the formatting is correct. And so the actual Docker file, I put it up here, is actually fairly straightforward and simple. I'm not gonna. You can look at this later on in detail if you care to, but it's very simple. It just installs dependencies, downloads clang-format, and then it runs it. You use it to run clang-format. That's about it. You would build it by just going into the clang-format directory. You build the Docker file, and then to actually format your changes, you would just sort of run the Docker file, the Docker image, with the file you want. And the way this does it right now is that it writes it to a copy and then it renames the copy file. And the reason for that is clang-format has the option. If you specify -i, it'll update in place. But when you run inside a container file or a Docker image rather, even if you specify the user you want inside, it still changes and messes with the file attributes. And for simplicity, it's just easier to do it this way. Someone can find a better way of doing it. They're free to obviously update the changes and whatnot. But for the purposes of scripting, this was just the most pragmatic approach I took. If this feels a little tedious, don't worry. I have an option that I'll talk about later on for how we can not have to think about doing this kind of work manually. But for now, this is sort of the raw way of doing it. So I mentioned
Erwin,
sorry,
just to clarify from a couple of slides back, for the
here or further back.
Well, no, I mean just for the Jenkins job, that if the linter runs and there is an issue, then that's going to the job itself is going to show as an error. It's going to have failed, And
That's right.
for changes in the compiler component, committers will not be merging those pull requests if there's a failure in the linter job.
Yeah, I anticipated being the same kind of judgment as for the line endings job.
Yep.
Like, a committer should only accept it if it really makes sense or if it was an error or something. But it's the same sort of expectation should be there as the line endings job.
Yep.
Right. So I mentioned namespace merging, and what that really is when in OMR in the compiler component specifically, when we forward declare classes inside of a namespace, we do so in this way where we say namespace OMR and then class compilation or whatever, but we do so for every single class. We don't have a common namespace OMR and then a bunch of classes underneath it. And so although right now that sits in one line, if you run clang-format on that, it actually converts into 3 lines, and that can artificially increase the file, the number of lines in the file, but also it isn't particularly pretty to look at. And so merging namespaces, while not strictly required, just improves readability, and it's one of the I believe it was Daryl who brought it up when we were first putting this out there and taking a look at how the code looked at. And so this will be one of the changes that will be part of the PR that we're going to open for the code formatting. And so the way it works is it's just a bunch of Perl scripts, Perl regular expressions. You can take a look at this in detail, but essentially what it does is it takes something like this, it wraps it in the namespace, and then it removes the inner namespaces. I've tested this, and I've also had people like Devin take a look at the regular expressions, and aside from some pathological cases that shouldn't be there in the code base, it's correct. So this will be part of the pull request. And then finally, the code formatting itself is a piece of cake. It's not complicated at all. You just take the files you want and you just give it to clang-format, and clang-format will apply it, and you create a commit with that. This is literally what I'm going to do when I open the pull request. So that's the bulk of the technical details. Did anyone have any questions before I move forward? Okay. So next step for developers, be prepared. This is coming. But how does this affect you? So all changes in flight will conflict with master post-merge. And so you're going to have to either format every single commit, or if that's too hard, you can always squash them and then format it, but it is something that you will need to do. You will need to install Clang 18.1.8 in some form, either explicitly as a binary if that's what makes you feel better, or you can use the Docker file, which is less effort to think about. And then all future commits will need to conform to the new coding style.
You said we want this to apply to every commit. The bit I've looked at, the pull request, it doesn't seem to apply to all the commits. It only looks at the result. Is that something we intend to change, or?
I think that I don't think so. Mainly because if going forward, once the changes are in and the code is formatted, aside from the initial set of commits where people have to make some changes and then get it in, eventually it'll be stable enough that it's probably not worth the effort to figure out how to do this for every single commit, or have the linter go through and do it for every single commit. But the expectation is that you should try and do it for every single commit.
Yeah, I understand we'll call it a request that people do it, but the linter is not going to check that that actually happens, only that the result is formatted. So if you've got 10 commits, it isn't going to look at the first 9 and make sure they're all formatted properly, only the final one.
Yeah, right now it doesn't. If people feel strongly enough about it, we can figure out how to make the linter do that.
Yeah, I'm sure it can be done. My question is, do we we say we want each commit to be formatted, but are we going to change the linter so that it does that? I think I know how to do it. We care.
I seem to vaguely recall this same conversation on a previous topic, and I think the decision was as long as the result was good. I don't remember what that was though.
It might have been the same thing. I feel like it sounds vaguely familiar. So I think I kept it linter simple when I first wrote the linter job because I based it pretty much on the line endings job, which does the same thing, where the line endings job doesn't check every commit, it just checks the result. But if there is a concern and we need to change it to be every commit, then we can update the linter appropriately. But yeah, I think I might have not done that because of what Adam just said. Okay. Sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah. So a question I meant to ask earlier, you're saying we're expecting developers to do this formatting before actually creating the commits. Have we made sure this works on all platforms developers might work on, like Mac OS, Linux, Windows? Not sure what else we might need to deal with.
I believe it'll work on wherever Clang works.
Well, I guess the question is that we're kind of, building Docker into the process. So I don't know if Docker exists in a version we can use on Windows.
Not Docker, but Podman does, I think. Is it not?
I don't know about Windows directly, but I use WSL too, and so it's basically Linux, I guess. But yeah, I have a Windows box, but I do all my development inside of the WSL2, and Podman works there.
I don't know. Maybe this is a solvable problem. Just want to make sure that people are thinking about it.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some amount of community involvement in terms of how to go forward properly, but yeah, I've essentially, as part of this, I've created some scripts and some other useful suggestions, but I don't think I've considered, for example, if you're developing on ZOS, I don't know if I have an answer for you. But Windows, yeah, I know for sure something like WSL will work. I don't know how well it works on, say, PowerShell or something like that.
I mean, in the worst case, you can just take the linter output that the CI job produced and then manually make your changes.
Yeah, the CI job doesn't currently show what it's expecting. It just says, it's not what I expected.
Oh, really? It doesn't actually show you the...
No, that was one of my comments in the pull request. It ought to at least show you some of what's, like maybe shouldn't output a few thousand lines per file, but maybe some of it, a limited set maybe.
Yeah, at the moment it just because I based it on the line endings, it does the same thing as line endings job. It just says, hey, you're missing line endings, that's it.
Didn't it used to report which files the line endings were missing?
It tells you the name of the files, but it won't show you the output of clang-format. It just tells you these files
format
are
will
missing.
tell you just the names of the files where there is some sort of a formatting issue.
That's what the linter does, yes.
Okay.
The clang-format itself, yes, you can have it output, right? If you don't do -i, it'll but the problem, I mean, what we'll have to do is we would have to do the diff, and then the diff would show you the difference between clang-format and what you've done. And you could then, yeah, you're right, you could take the clang-format part of it and just apply it. But right now the diff is quiet. It doesn't print out the output of the diff.
I mean, even just from a usability perspective, I think it would be helpful if the job showed the diff, because many times I think it would just be one or two small things that someone would have to fix up, and then they would just go do those changes manually, as opposed to firing up clang-format locally to find out where and then repairing it.
Especially if it's only the very end, like if you have 10 commits and it didn't work, like have to go and figure out which commit it was, but what's the problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly easy to have it print out the diff. It's not.
Oh,
Yeah, but to Mark's point, I think what if we don't have the tool to check every commit, I think what we're going to end up with is people do those 10 commits and add an 11th one to fix the formatting.
Right.
And the linter will be
So,
fine with that, but
one of the options to deal with this is something I talk about later on, which is a Git
Okay.
hook. Like a Git hook will basically completely address all of these things, but again, you have to be okay using Git on the command line. I'm not sure how the hooks work on something like eGit or any other desktop tool, but on the command line, none of these are actually issues anymore. But yeah, I mean, yeah, we can come back to this at the end if you want, and then we can hash out some of these concerns once you see options on how to deal with this. But it is a valid concern. The problem with the linter is that the output might get if you have it output an error for every commit, it's gonna get messy really quick because you're gonna have let's just say you have formatting issues in every commit for every file. It's gonna be a lot of output. At some point, you could just have a commit that says fix up formatting issues, and depending on how complicated it is, the committer might be okay with it. But I mean, I'll leave that for others to discuss.
I don't know if I would go along with that. I mean, if the source code right now is, if the baseline is going to be formatted and someone is trying to deliver code that is so deviant from the coding standard that, and then the only way that they would fix it is just by dropping an extra commit that repairs it. I wouldn't support that.
No. I'm not saying anything as egregious as that. But for example, in the past, I've definitely had issues where people or have PRs where people have been okay with the fact that I had a single commit where I fixed up all the copyrights back when we cared about the copyrights, right? It's happened before where it was just like literally, I think four or five files where it was just fix up copyright, and it wasn't worth going back and squashing them to the exact file where it was modified.
Yeah, I think people need to get into the habit of developing to the new style, I think.
Yeah. I don't think that like someone should be coding in whatever style they want. They should at least very least look at the file and try to be as close as possible. My comment was more related to the fact that if there's say 10 commits and you're going to have differences in every single file, at some point the output of the linter is not going to be useful anymore if you have each commit. I think if the final result is not like has a difference between clang-format and it tells you what file that's happening in, you just have to, I think, go and fix your stuff in the same way that you would fix the line endings, right? You would pick a commit where you did this.
we could discuss this forever with hypothetical scenarios that could come up. I'd just pick a reasonable default and let's start and see what happens. And if bad things keep happening, then we can iterate and try to eliminate those bad things and deal with it.
So
that's fair.
One point I'd like to make though, we compare this to the line end check where a committer kind of has the discretion to ignore what that check says. I think the bar should be much higher for ignoring what the linter has to say, because you're just pushing it down the road to the next person that wants to change that file. Right.
Yeah,
so either it'll get fixed later or every commit to that file is going to have a complaint.
I agree with that. I think if the job fails and there's a good reason for the job to fail, then you want to change those. Like add the whatever the pragma is or whatever the heck it is that you put into the source code to tell the clang format to eliminate it, you should make that part of that commit. Or at the very least, the following commit. Like we shouldn't be collecting a bunch of failures that people have to know to pass along all the time.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I don't think we allow a failed line ending job to go through. I think if there's a line ending error, I've definitely not committed it. I've asked them to fix it.
Well, my point wasn't to, point at people ignoring the line in job failure, but that ignoring this one ought to be much rarer if it happens at all.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it should be ignored at all. I think I agree with you. We don't ever ignore this one. It has to be fixed in some commit. Otherwise, you're right. Like it'll just keep popping up. So.
I agree with that.
All right. I'll continue, and then I'm sure we'll come back to this discussion at the end. What can you do? So one of the things you can do to help out post merge is I've written a rebase helper script, which helps you essentially just rebase your commits across the merge point. Unfortunately, it doesn't work well if you have multiple commits for the same file, but at the very least, it saves you some hassle. It might be hard to see, but essentially all it does is the stuff in black just rebases how many commits you want to rebase and calls a script. The stuff in blue is a script, and all the script does is it calls clang-format and then does some git magic to sort of essentially just squash it, so you don't actually see the change. Essentially the formatted change becomes part of your commit. The reason this doesn't work if you have multiple commits with the same file is because the way the git rebase-x works is that it first applies the commit and then formats the file and it creates a new commit which gets squashed. But if you have two commits in the same file, you're going to hit a merge conflict when that happens. So, it's optional, might help you, might not, but at the very least, I wrote something that you can use. People who are better at Git might find a better solution. If you do, please, make it known. But I put this on the issue. It's a little bit outdated, so I'll probably have to update everything, but this is something that people can use. And then the second thing that you can do is to consider using the git pre-commit hook. And this is probably the recommended way of doing it, because what it does is it completely removes the need for you to think about clang-format. What you do is you make a script in the .git/hooks folder called pre-commit, and all you do in that is just copy this stuff in there, and it'll every time before it creates the commit, it will run clang-format, and then you see there's a git add over there. So it then adds the files and then makes the commit. Therefore, you are guaranteed that your every commit is formatted because you never have to explicitly run git format clang-format. So this is if you can integrate this into your workflow, it is the recommended way of doing it because it removes the overhead of thinking about it completely. So these are all the links. I'll make the presentation available. I'll hand it over to Daryl, or maybe I'll attach it to the issue. And yeah, that's sort of the end of the presentation. So floor is open for discussion now.
The compiler component has always been kind of special relative to the rest of OMR. Do you foresee us erasing that difference and applying this formatting to the rest of the code base?
I have not had any issue with it. The last time when it was first suggested in 2019, for the most part, it was just other components that had concerns because they, felt like there was a predefined, well-defined predefined format standard that they were already following, and that they should not have to, like, everyone shouldn't have to change just because the some components are less ideal than others. If the community and the project as a whole can agree, I don't anticipate any issues. I think it would be better if everything was consistent.
Actually kind of raises the question how I haven't looked at the formatted stuff that this produces recently. How does it compare generally to other code in OMR that claims to follow our documented coding standards?
It's closer to the VM format. Let's put it that way. Like it looks much more similar to the VM format than the TR format for sure. I think it's based on WebKit or something. I can't remember exactly. But when you look at it, it looks, like quite a lot more similar to the VM side of things. And I think that was one of the reasons that was chosen, because when I believe it was Philip first proposed it, it was to sort of make it as close to what the non-compiler components were already using.
Okay, well, if we succeed on that measurement, then maybe the other components will have less to complain about when we propose formatting everything.
Yeah, that was part of the reason for doing the compiler component, was also in some sense like a proof of concept to show, hey, look, the linter works, the automated stuff works, the workflow seems okay, and then we have a working prototype, and then it shows empirical evidence for why this is a good thing.
Okay. There are other files besides, C, CPP, HPP that contain C or C++ code. Should we just update the pattern matching or whatever to include those at some point, or?
What's an example?
I don't know. I think there's stuff, with relation to enums that have a different extension. I don't have.
I think something's within different number, so just it may already be valid standalone syntax. The enum ones, Keith, are those .inc files or .enum files, I think, and they're really just intended to be included within some other. Like they won't stand alone on their own.
Okay, but I guess my expectation is if they're included in the compiler code base, that they have to follow the same format as the stuff where they live. And so I don't know, maybe there are technical challenges to making that happen because they're not a full source file. I don't know.
Like for enums, they're just literally a list of names on. I mean, I guess we could define the format of that. Like their names followed by a comma.
Generally a list of macros, like the opcodes.enum is a opcode macro, and the comments, and then the lconst, floatconst, whatever.
I mean, I can see what you're saying, but I wonder if that's a 2.0 kind of thing that we would.
Yeah, well, I'm not suggesting it should gate the rest of what's being proposed. I'm just asking, what's the plan for these things that aren't captured by the current pattern, but that kind of are C and C++ code. So yeah, the .enum files are maybe not a big deal, but trying to find another example.
.ins is another one, although it's kind of a similar format to the enum files.
Yeah. I don't know if there's an analog of this that might apply to assembler source files.
Well, the goal was really to get the 95+% of the code base that's written in.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm not.
C++ derived language. So. think we can.
I guess my point is this isn't the end, I'm hoping, and so, do we have plans for these other things?
Yeah, I mean, this may not be the ending. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it would be nice if the entire component, the entire OMR source base have the same formatting. It would be a nice, just from a consistency point of view. So that could be a goal that we eventually achieve in the future. But like Erwin said, this is sort of a trial run. Let's see how things go with this. Let's work out some of the kinks. Perhaps even applying this to other downstream projects that are consuming OMR if they're interested. So Erwin, what are your to-dos here? Looking at whether the CI or the linter can be applied per commit, and then recording the output of the diff in the CI job. So those two things. And then I guess the other thing that I would wonder, I know you said that there are vacations that may affect this. What is your estimate for when this work would begin? I know you want to end at September 30th, but by September 30th. But when do you think this might begin? Like mid-August, for example?
I mean, I was thinking we could probably do it. What is it? Let's see. Probably the week. We could start on the week of the 28th of July. At least make sure, like, ideally the sooner the better, because the longer you have before a release, the more time we have to work things out. So I mean, I can spend the next few days addressing some of the review comments and also some of the comments in this meeting. Get things in a more ready state from an infrastructure point of view, because the actual code format is not a huge deal. I can also kick off functional tests again, just to make sure that there shouldn't be any expected problems. I know Adam updated some of the scripts he said, so I need to apply his changes to the infrastructure PR. I need to take a look at that and then try it out and everything. But like ideally, the week of the 28th, we would start going, right?
Okay.
Not so much August.
One thing I just thought of this, or just recalled this now, I didn't see in this presentation was there is a way, like if you did all the reformatting in a single commit, and then as you're planning on doing, there is a way for people to add that commit or just to add a reference to that commit somewhere in their git commit so that it gets excluded when doing diffs, right?
Right. I think I've heard about that in terms of git blame. I haven't.
I think there's a link to one of the issues that maybe the 2019 issue. I think there's a link to the technique there, if I'm not mistaken. Right. I know it's somewhere where we had talked about this before. Anyway, that might be something to surface as well to people when they are adjusting to this.
Right.
And Keith, if you're still on, I know now that you've heard all of this, how does this sound to you in your development workflow? Is this okay? Any issues? Oh, I'm sorry, not Keith. I'm sorry. I meant Kevin. Sorry. Sorry.
Feel free to answer also, Keith. No, it's
yeah.
It looks,
wrong. Yeah, you like the
it looks fine from my perspective. I think
okay.
It shouldn't disrupt us at all.
Okay.
Thanks.
So my primary concerns are, I mean, my preference is to use Eclipse for my IDE, and I don't know. Like you made reference to whether the hooks are going to work with eGit. I don't know. I'm going to have to find out, I guess. And I don't know if I saw in your hook whether it filtered on just the path names are in the compiler component.
Yeah, it filters on the compiler component. I may have to do the same change here that you suggested, the case, but
Right.
it's still
Case.
yeah, but it's still only compiler directory because I don't want this to affect anything else.
Right.
Obviously, like if more of the project was involved later on, then we would have to update the hooks, right? But
Sure. Actually, maybe some form of the hook makes sense to include in OMR repo somewhere. So you can just tell people, oh, copy this, and then when we update it, say, well, I'll update your copy.
right, yeah, that makes sense.
Or on Linux, your the hook can just be a symlink to the one in the repo. It's updated.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I think for the default case, that might be a good idea. I know some people have complicated Git setups, so they might. But I guess in their case, they don't need this hook anyways because they know what they're doing. So that's a fair point.
Yeah. So actually, one of the things that I think would need updating is detecting whether you should use Podman instead of Docker, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. I like for me, I use Podman because I'm a WSL. So I had to modify all the scripts for this. Like I was copying my stuff from my computer, but I needed to make sure I put Docker because that's what I've been putting online. But you're right. It would need a more robust solution would sort of do what we do in the make Docker script where we detect the engine.
Right.
I guess that's an OpenJ9, but you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Right, are there other questions for Erwin or any comments that people want to make?
I have a quick question. So we're using a specific version of clang-format, or was it 18 dot whatever it was? Do we have any idea what the lifetime of that version is? Or how often are we going to have to update the version of clang-format?
I don't know what the lifetime is in terms of when they're supporting or whatnot. The idea is we don't update it unless we agree as a community, specifically because it changes the way it interprets the same config file, which is annoying because like it'll be minor changes. I think I tested 18.1.4 and 18.1.8 just to see if there was a difference, and it was like 2 lines somewhere. And so or not, sorry, it was not 2 lines somewhere. It was a handful of files in some macro or something like that. And so my expectation is that we sort of pick a version and sit on it for quite a while, unless there's a good reason to update, like some newer version provides some additional functionality. Like I know one of the things we talked about that can't be done by clang-format, but is a nice thing to do is have comments for the ending of macros. Or if-defs, sorry. So the end-if should tell you what the if-def is. clang-format is able to do that for namespaces, but it can't for some reason do it for macro if-defs. I don't know why. If that ever comes up in the future and we decide this is really worth having, maybe it makes sense to update then. But most of the time, I don't think it's worth updating for the minor for the cost of having inconsistencies in the output. Especially because if the inconsistencies are sort of widespread, we would have to have another commit to sort of update all the code base again. So I anticipate we sort of just stick to one. And this one, multiple people have looked at the output, they've made their comments, and it just feels a lot of work to change.
So Erwin, is the input to clang-format, like for this WebKit syntax, is that like a separate data file or something? And is that what has changed between the different clang-format versions, or did the tool itself change that's interpreting that file
The
So I'm
tool
wondering if you
itself.
could use the, I wonder if you could use the, oh, so it's using the same data file, but it's producing a different
Yeah,
output
yeah.
from it.
That's what makes it annoying. It's not like the file we use. It's at the dash style equals file and then the dot clang format file. That is what clang format uses. But so that file will not change. I literally will use the same file, just two different builds, and they have different outputs.
Yeah, that may or may not be what the clang format people expect you to do. Like if you upgrade to a newer version, maybe to get the same format, you have to ask a different, for a different, you have to specify a different style. I mean, it's not ideal either, but if there's a way to say, to describe the style you want for the newer version, even if the description is different than the old version, we could change, the version and the specification kind of as one commit, right?
Yeah, I mean that makes sense for when you have major version changes, but in the minor version
Yeah,
changes,
no,
the config files options, like the YAML file options, are the same. It's just for that same set of choices, it will do slightly different things, and you have no control over that anymore. This was one of the criticisms I had read up online when I was looking up sort of how clang format works. People were saying, well, other formatters are strict. Other formatters are often strict supersets. So, but clang format isn't. And people were just saying, well, you shouldn't be upgrading that often or something. That was essentially the recommendation. But in terms of like the original question, like lifetime and support, I'm not really sure. I'd have to go look at what Clang does, but it just sits on GitHub, so at some point it might become a your mileage might vary, use at your own risk type thing. But 18.1.8 was released last year, so it's actually fairly recent. And if you go on the releases website, they still provide links to all the way to, I can't even remember, pretty far back. So I don't anticipate it not being available for quite a while.
Okay, any other questions for Erwin? Okay. If not, thank you, Erwin, for taking us through that. And so we'll be hearing from you in a couple of weeks' time as this starts to. And I guess in the meantime, there's like we said, there's some issues to address. I guess there's some comments that have been put in the issue in the PR as well.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm just gonna do the PR commits, look at the how does it look to change the linter to be on every commit, sort of just see what that all looks like, and then we can make a decision.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, thanks for taking us through that. And we'll meet again in 2 weeks at the architecture meeting. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.